Whenever American employers complain about a labor shortage, it is worth asking one more question. A shortage of workers or a shortage of workers willing to accept the wages and conditions being offered? Because throughout American history, immigration has often worked like a valve. When landowners and corporations need more workers, the valve opened. When those workers organized, demanded equality, or became economically inconvenient, the valve closed, and politicians blamed the immigrants for problems created by employers. That does not mean immigrants came here as part of some capitalist conspiracy. People came to escape famine, persecution, unemployment, war, and poverty, or simply to build better lives. But employers and governments quickly learned how useful a politically vulnerable workforce could be. During the 19th century, the United States needed two things at once: settlers to occupy and develop territory, and workers to build an industrial economy. Between 1860 and 1900, about 14 million immigrants entered the United States. They supplied labor for railroads, mines, steel mills, factories, construction, agriculture, and domestic service. The Library of Congress notes that employees commonly took advantage of immigrants and paid them less than other workers. The Transcontinental Railroad gives us one of the cleanest examples. The Central Pacific Railroad was having trouble recruiting enough workers. Some existing workers had gone on strike, and management did not want to solve the shortage by raising wages. So the company recruited Chinese immigrants. By 1868, roughly 11,000 Chinese workers were building the railroad. They performed dangerous work, blasting tunnels, laying track, and crossing mountains, but were paid about 30% less than white workers. Unlike many white workers, they also had to cover their own food and lodging. That is not immigrants stealing jobs. That is an employer deliberately finding workers it believed it could pay less. And when Chinese workers organized a strike in 1867 demanding equal pay and better conditions, the company cut off food deliveries to the camps until they returned to work. Once the railroad was built and the economy weakened, Chinese workers went from being useful labor to convenient scapegoats. Anti-Chinese violence spread, and Congress passed the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1882. Recruit them when profits require them, exclude them when their presence becomes politically inconvenient. That pattern keeps showing up. Irish immigrants entered coal mines, canal construction, railroads, domestic service, and other dangerous jobs near the bottom of the labor market. Later, Italians and immigrants from southern and eastern Europe filled mines, mills, sweatshops, and construction crews. Many Italian workers were recruited through the padrone system, where labor brokers controlled their contracts, wages, transportation, and even food. Some workers were confined in camps behind fences and armed guards. The Library of Congress describes some padroni as behaving more like slaveholders than ordinary managers. Employers also learned that ethnic and racial divisions could weaken unions. Coal operators sometimes fired organized workers and replaced them with Irish, Italian, black, or newly arrived laborers who had fewer options and less protection. One historical account summarized the company's view rather bluntly. The replacement workers could be used. The coal company owned them. The workers themselves were not the enemy. The strategy was to keep each group suspicious of the next one while the owner remained safely above the fight. Tell native-born workers the immigrants are lowering their wages. Tell immigrant workers the union hates them. Tell white workers black workers are taking their jobs. Tell everybody that the problem is the person standing beside them instead of the person setting the wages. Mexican labor followed the same open and close pattern. During the 1920s, American employers eagerly recruited Mexican workers for agriculture, railroads, mines, and factories. Then the Great Depression arrived. Suddenly, those same workers were described as a burden. Hundreds of thousands of people of Mexican descent were pushed or coerced into leaving the United States during the 1930s, including American citizens who were deported because officials assumed they were foreigners. Sound familiar? Many were the same workers employees had recruited only a few years earlier. Then, World War II created another labor shortage. American farmers wanted cheap workers again, so the United States and Mexico created the Barracio program in 1942. More than 5 million Mexican workers entered under a temporary contract before the program ended in 1964. They were generally paid low wages and often endured conditions American workers would not accept. Treatment in Texas became so abusive that Mexico temporarily refused to send workers there. And here's the part that tells you what the policy was really doing. At the same time, one branch of government was importing Mexican workers, another was conducting mass deportations. America wanted the labor. It did not necessarily want the laborer to possess permanent rights, bargaining power, or political membership. That distinction still exists today. Temporary agriculture workers under the H-2A program have important legal protections. Employers are supposed to provide required wages, safe housing, transportation, workers' compensation, and protect from retaliation. but the worker's legal status is generally tied to the employer sponsoring the visa. A 2005 Government Accountability Office reported that workers were often reluctant to report violations because losing the job would mean losing legal status and facing deportation. Workers also feared retaliation, blacklisting, and debts created by illegal recruitment fees. That produces an obvious power imbalance. Your boss does not merely control your paycheck. Your boss may effectively control whether you remain in the country. Undocumented workers are even more vulnerable. They may technically possess labor rights, but complaining about stolen wages or unsafe conditions can still feel dangerous when deportation hangs over the entire relationship. The Department of Labor itself acknowledges that immigration status can limit the remedies available after unlawful retaliation. And that is the real function of a vulnerable labor class. It is not necessary to physically chain people to a workplace if leaving means unemployment, homelessness, deportation, family separation, or blacklisting. Again, wage labor is not identical to chattel slavery. Immigrants are not property, and they retain rights and choices enslaved people did not possess. But employers have repeatedly sought workers who possess less power to say no. The point is not that immigration is bad. Immigrants built the railroads, harvested the food, mined the coal, staffed the factories, opened businesses, formed unions, and enriched American culture. The problem is a system that welcomes people primarily as labor inputs while denying them equal power as human beings. Closing the border does not solve that. It merely gives employers a different group of vulnerable workers to exploit: prisoners, children, contractors, temporary workers, or laborers hidden farther down in international supply chain. The real solution is equal labor rights, union protection, enforceable wages, portable visas, and a path to citizenship. Because when every worker has the same rights, employers lose the ability to threaten one group with another. America's immigration system has never simply asked who deserves to come here. More often, it has asked whose labor do we need, how cheaply can we obtain it, and how few rights can we give the people performing it.